I'm going to put my statement in the record, except to say that we're here for Todd Blanche and Abigail Slater's nominations to be reported out, and hopefully before the end of this meeting, we will get our fentanyl bill out. So I'll, without objection, I'll put my statement in the record. I hope that we can, by meeting at 9 o'clock this morning, that before our members are going to the White House, we can have the work of this committee on the agenda today reported out. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry that more members are not here. I think there's something we need to discuss openly and publicly and seriously. Yesterday's meeting with several nominees led to some questionings, which I think have to be reflected on, and none of us should have just a gut reaction. During my time on the committee, my respect has grown for this committee, the Senate, Congress, and the Constitution, of course. From advice and consent to the power of the purse, the Founding Fathers granted the legislative branch exclusive powers in the Constitution, exclusive, in part to ensure the executive branch did not become too powerful. For nearly 250 years, this system is held. But let's be honest, brutally honest. President Trump is testing the limits of our Constitution like they've never been tested in my lifetime. President Trump and Elon Musk are pursuing a power grab that, if left unchecked, will leave the federal courts impotent and Congress a museum piece. That's a fact. I want to caution my Republican colleagues that yesterday's conversation about court orders, I reflected on it over and over again. Members of the Republican side, who I deeply respect for their knowledge and their dealings on a bipartisan basis, said things yesterday which cannot stand. The notion that anyone can ignore a court order, particularly an elected official, really calls into question the fundamentals of checks and balances. I want to caution my Republican colleagues that the precedents that the Trump administration is establishing could be followed by a future Democratic president. We now have a precedent that an incoming president can fire the FBI director and nominate a partisan campaign advisor who pledges to seek retribution against the president's rivals. We have precedent that the deputy FBI director can now be someone like Dan Bongino, a partisan conspiracy theorist with no previous FBI experience, though he did, in fairness, serve in the Secret Service. For more than 100 years, the deputy FBI director has been a career FBI agent. Today, we have an FBI director in Mr. Bongino who has said an Oppo research firm for Democrats, he called the FBI an Oppo research firm for Democrats with an armed political enforcement branch. He said the agency should be disbanded. He's now the deputy. Thanks to acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, we also now have the precedent that the Justice Department's senior ethics officials can be partisan political appointees. This is a dramatic departure from longstanding practice under previous administrations, Democrat and Republican, where a senior official had responsibility for ethics. But the list doesn't end here. President Trump is trying to establish a precedent that he can fire inspectors general and the heads of independent agencies for no reason at all, violating laws duly enacted by this Congress, even by members of this committee on both sides of the aisle. The Justice Department recently informed this committee it plans to ask the Supreme Court to overturn a 90-year-old precedent known as Humphrey's Executor, which upheld the constitutionality of laws protecting the heads of independent agencies from being fired. Who cares? Why does this matter? Because agencies like the National Labor Relations Board and Consumer Product Safety Commission, even if not familiar to most Americans, play crucial roles in protecting the rights of workers and the safety of all Americans. If President Trump is successful, any future president will be able to sack these bipartisan agencies with appointees from their own political party. The rules of the road will swing wildly back and forth every time there is a change in administration. Yesterday, when we asked about court orders, it was an interesting conversation. The nominees were not willing to say unequivocally that a public official should follow an order of the court. I found that breathtaking because, as I said, it raises serious existential constitutional questions. And then in the rebuttal period, one of the Republican senators, he's here, I'm glad he's here, Senator Hawley, said, would you require that someone, I don't want to misstate his words, and I'm going to give him adequate time to respond. Would you say that someone facing the Korematsu decision, a horrible decision creating Japanese internment camps, would be required to follow that order? Or how about Dred Scott, his treatment of slaves as non-citizens? Would you follow that court order? But of course, if you go down that road and choose to take it, what would a racist say about Brown versus Board of Education? I'm not going to follow that court order. In good conscience, I can't. And then what do you have? I think we've got to step back and have an honest discussion about this. And I hope it can be on a bipartisan basis. And I will assume at the outset that all the senators engaging in it share, as I do, the sanctity of the oath that we've taken to uphold this Constitution. There's a lot to do in this committee. We'll get beyond the somewhat routine nature of nominations. But I hope we have a Congress that survives this process. And I hope that members on both sides will realize our obligation is to the Constitution more than any single political party. Thank you, Mr. President. Chairman.
I don't have a response to what you said because what you said is a legitimate statement from the standpoint that there ought to be a discussion of it. But I would just remind you that whatever power this president says he's exercising, a lot of it is because we have delegated over the last 60 years too much congressional authority under Article 1 to any president. And that's our fault for not doing our job right. And most of that, or a lot of that, happened before you and I ever got to the Congress of the United States.
The question is, where do we go from here, Mr. Chairman? I think, and I hope that people realize we have a responsibility to not only be loyal to the Constitution, but at the end of the day, to protect the institution we've been elected to serve in.
You bet, yeah. Okay, the first two items on our agenda are the nomination of Todd Blanche and Abigail Slater. We don't have enough people here to vote these nominees out, but I would welcome people to speak on these nominations while we're
Mr. Chairman.
Does anyone wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman.
Who's calling? Senator Hawley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since Senator Durbin mentioned our exchange yesterday, I'm happy to respond to that. And I'm happy to say for the record, and I want this to be very clear, I will not defend the Korematsu decision. And I will not defend the Dred Scott decision. And I'm stunned to hear anybody on the committee suggest that they should be defended. Those are absolutely abhorrent decisions. I won't defend Plessy. I think these are terrible decisions. And I will defend President Lincoln, who gave an answer very much like the one John Sauer gave yesterday to the ranking member. When President Lincoln was asked, when he was a Senate candidate, about the Dred Scott decision, what he said is, I will obey the mandate as it relates to the individual Dred Scott, but I will not apply it beyond that. If I were to be elected president, if it were his decision to make, he said, and this is what he did do as president, he said, I will not apply it beyond the individual Dred Scott. Why not? Because he thought it was grievously wrong, that it raised grave constitutional questions, indeed that it was a grievous violation of the Constitution of the United States. I just submit to you that was exactly the right answer. What John Sauer said in response to the ranking member was, of course, in the great generality of cases, a court order is binding, and all the time we have to follow court orders we don't like, and we have to follow decisions we don't like. But he was asked by the ranking member, is there ever a circumstance, ever, in which you might question the scope of a court order or not follow exactly what the court said? And Sauer said, I could imagine a case, Korematsu. Dred Scott is another one. So I just submit to you, I hope we have men and women of conscience like Lincoln, like others, many judges I pointed out who resigned rather than enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. I hope that we have men and women of conscience like that. And I just submit to the ranking member that the answer that John Sauer gave to him is exactly correct. It's exactly correct.
With the Senator,
and I just think that I think that the attempt to defend the Korematsu decision or others and say that they ought to be followed blindly, I just submit to you that that's a mistake.
With the Senator yield for a question. I think there should be a clear distinction between defending or explaining a court decision which you find repugnant, and you've listed 3 or 4, and whether you're required under our Constitution and laws to follow it until it's changed. I mean, I think what you did, your quote of Lincoln is a perfect illustration of that. As I heard it for the first time here, he basically said, I will follow this, though I don't agree with it. So my question is, if you go to your position, that anyone, if I'm misstating it, please correct me, that anyone who disagrees with a court order and cannot in good conscience personally endorse it is not required to follow it, where do you end? Where do you draw the line? What about the racist with Brown versus Board of Education? Does that person also have the protection of saying, I can ignore any court order that I find morally repugnant, and I think integration is morally repugnant?
Well, Senator Durbin, I would just point out that when Lincoln adopted the position that I just rehearsed, when he said that he would apply it as to the individual Dred Scott, but of course you will remember that's not quite what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court said it wasn't limited to Dred Scott. They said, of course, that no African-born American could ever be a free man. They're all slaves. And what Lincoln said is, I reject that, and I will not apply that. He said, I recognize that the court's mandate binds me as to Dred Scott, but he said, I won't apply it beyond that. And he was roundly and loudly accused by the South of engaging in judicial nullification and saying, you're not following a court order. And he said, well, I'll follow it as to Scott, but only Scott. I won't apply it more broadly, which kind of is in fact what the court had ordered. So here's my point. You asked Sauer if there's ever an instance, ever, in which an elected official might not follow a court order to its fullest. And he said to you, generally, I think there is no such instance, but maybe there could be extreme cases. I think this is one. And my point is to you, I think his answer to you was a good one. I actually think it's the answer you're looking for. And I would just say, surely we want to say in a few cases, like the Dred Scott case with Lincoln, surely we want to preserve the ability of our elected officials to say, I think that this is wrong. And listen, I think you and I probably agree. If you get to the point where, as an elected official, whether a judge or an executive branch official, you just can't follow the court's mandate at all, then of course the answer is you should resign.
Yes, and I just close with this. This is not just theoretical. We now have a president and vice president who are challenging, at least in their statements, the premise of what we're discussing. And I think it goes to the heart of whether we're going to face a constitutional crisis in this country. And the sooner we have a fulsome debate on this, the better.
Before I call on Senator Kennedy, I want to remind everybody that we've got about an hour to get the committee's work done before we're going to lose a lot of people to do other things.
I'll be brief.
Senator Kennedy.
You both make interesting points, and for another day, we should go with this in detail. I will remind Senator Durbin, with respect, that the last administration ignored court orders too.
Which one?
Student loans.
No, it didn't.
It seems to me that there's a distinction between disagreeing with a court order and defying a court order. What we're talking about here is the legitimacy of the federal judiciary. That's all any of our institutions have, is their legitimacy. It's especially true with the federal judiciary because they don't have an army. In my opinion, when you try to pack the Supreme Court, and I'm not saying everybody did this in bad faith, but when some in bad faith try to write an ethics code for the Supreme Court because they're angry at the way the Supreme Court ruled, when you say you're going to defy a court order because you don't agree with it, those are all instances of undermining the legitimacy of the federal judiciary, and it needs to stop now on both sides.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm not through, Mr. Chairman.
When he is through,
I'm
he'll
not
be
through.
recognized.
Senator Whitehouse.
He says he's not through. Let him finish, and I'll.
And
thank
it
you
needs
for
to stop on both sides. I don't want to belabor this, but if you disagree with a federal court order, you can criticize it, you can appeal it, you can offer your thoughts on it, or you can resign. And once we start ignoring court orders or packing courts as we have, or standing on the Supreme Court and threatening justices, all you're doing is undermining the legitimacy of the court.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Two things. First, I was here in the committee yesterday when Senator Kennedy spoke to the panel and gave them very firm advice to knock it off and follow court orders. And I want to commend him for doing that. I think that's exactly the right statement that should come from this body, and I think it should be, as Ranking Member Durbin said, unequivocal. I do have to raise objection to the opinion that the ethics bill that was brought forward by me was done, to quote the senator, in bad faith.
I didn't say you did it, Sheldon, in bad faith.
Well, I'm the one
I
who
said
did it,
I
and you
said
used the
some.
word in bad faith. So do the math. It adds up coming to me. I just want to make the point that there are 50 Supreme Courts, courts of highest appeal in all of our different states. And they all share the alleged predicament that supervision of the judges on the highest court might cause a separation of powers issue to emerge, or might in some fashion challenge the supremacy of that highest court. 50 for 50, they have figured it out. There is no insurmountable separation of powers problem. And because ethics violations are an administrative thing, not an adjudicative thing, it is perfectly fine in all of these courts for lower court judges and even civilians to administer an ethics code. So there is nothing that can arguably be stated to be in bad faith about trying to get the United States Supreme Court to solve for itself a problem that every single one of the state Supreme Courts.
Mr. Chairman, my name was. If you interpret it that way, try to undermine the courts, and they're upset with the Dodd decision, and we both know that's true. But no,
Mr. Chairman. Here, I just zooming back, what's legitimate and legitimacy. To nominee for the Justice Department, and we cannot look. Legitimacy to me is upholding laws, making it very court order, violent criminals that were by this administration, not by demoting or reassigning experienced prosecutors or firing lists assigned to work on voted to justice. Mr. Blanche, person, New York, when he was there, he sits beside Bove. Bove appears to make the case or who was the, I'm going to paraphrase this in his letter, when you may find a motion to withdraw under in the try to make the right, and that's what the Congress is supposed to be. Please do that, you.
He says, DOJ, please inform us how is the best way that we can proceed to prevent. So I know that the law enforcement side, that's just one part of the fentanyl crisis, but I do think that prevention is a very important part, and this is an amendment that is very common sense. So I encourage my colleagues to vote for
I
it.
can't hear a thing you're saying. Senator Cornyn.
Mr. President, I know that several senators have amendments to this legislation. I just want to make sure, first of all, that the letters from 200 impacted family groups facing fentanyl is the name of the organization, in support of the bill as written, the National Association of Police Organizations, and another letter representing a significant portion of the nation's federal, state, and local law enforcement community, all in support of the bill as currently written without any amendment, that those are made part of the record.
Without objection, they will be. The clerk will call the roll.
If I can just respond to to Senator Hirono's statement. You know, fentanyl poisoning is the leading cause of death for young people between the age of 18 and 45. And I worry that the longer we dither over some of the fine points of chemistry on this bill, that it's like watching the house burn down and suggesting maybe we need to use a different sort of hose to put out the fire, or maybe that's not the best analogy, but you get my point. There have been 60 years of research into fentanyl-related substances, and this bill just says any substance that is related to fentanyl would be scheduled as a dangerous drug and would be subject to and would be prohibited from sale. According to the DEA, as of January 2025, 36 different researchers are registered to conduct research into fentanyl-related substances through the existing Schedule I researcher program. So the idea that this needs more research, to me, is just not supported by the facts. And I worry that the longer we delay in the permanent scheduling of these fentanyl-related substances, that more people are simply just going to die. And I, like a lot of us, have gone to grieving families at schools all across the state of Texas, and I'm sure others have had this experience too, and met with grieving families whose young son or daughter has taken a pill that they believe was a relatively innocuous pill, only to not find out, but their parents found out that it was a counterfeit pill contaminated with fentanyl or some derivative of that, and killed them. So I think the best course of action, and I'm asking our members on both sides of the aisle, but that we resist any additional amendments which will delay the passage of this bill. I also am very concerned about any changes that we might make in the underlying bill, what the House of Representatives might do. They have a hard time passing much of anything with razor-thin margins. So I would just ask my colleagues to resist any of these amendments, no matter how well-intended, because I don't think they're going to serve the purpose for which I think we all agree, which is how do we save lives and prevent more fentanyl-related deaths.
Mr. Chairman,
20 people have died from fentanyl poisoning just while this committee's been meeting. Senator Booker,
and exactly.
I will always yield to Senator Hirono first.
go ahead, Senator.
Hold that thought. So, Mr. Chairman, I should think that we would care about prevention. And this is an amendment that has nothing to do with the chemical components of fentanyl or its anodynes. So this is a bill that actually addresses prevention, something that we don't seem to spend very much time on around here. And so this is not a bill, Senator Cornyn, an amendment that will delay anything. It actually, in my view, will save lives when young people learn that this is a very deadly drug that they can easily obtain
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if our colleagues are worried about prevention, I think they would join us in doing more to secure the border and to prevent the smuggling of fentanyl into the country. And that's, obviously, there's been a wide divergence between the Biden administration, the Trump administration on that score, but stopping the flow of the drug in the United States, doing more to prevent the Chinese chemical companies from supplying those precursors to the cartels who manufacture the pills in Mexico would do a whole lot to prevent more fentanyl-related deaths. I think the senator's amendment would do nothing.
Mr. Chairman, we heard testimony that this fentanyl is obtained on the internet. It has nothing to do with people bringing fentanyl through the borders. Let's get our facts straight.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, you said you would recognize me.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, on this amendment, but I do want to respond to my friend and colleague. The idea that we're dithering over science, to me, is difficult for me to swallow, given the mistakes this body has made. We didn't talk about the science in the differences between crack and powder cocaine, and we made a mistake. And it's not a mistake that it hasn't been talked to by both parties. This committee in the previous Congress worked to correct a mistake that unfortunately led to collectively thousands of years of unjust incarceration. And it's not asking for more research. You and I both know, like, God, it's the last thing we need. It's creating a research protocol after the fact of arrest to look at the actual substances to see, did these substances actually cause harm, or could some of these substances be used as an antagonist to actually help people in fentanyl crisis? It's just common sense. This isn't about dithering. I know the senator referenced that he's got scientists, and there's so many different scientific organizations, and we've entered them into the record before, we will again, that have called on us just to create the basic protocols. In addition to that, we don't need to lecture each other. Every person on this committee knows the urgency of getting this done. Everybody does. Everybody here has sat with families who are in pain. And you mentioned submitting to the letter the people that want this passed. I want to see permanent scheduling. I'd like to enter for the record a letter from 400 New Jersey families. This is not a national group. This is just New Jersey families.
Without objection, it will be entered.
And the letter that just asks for us to do as much as we possibly can to meet this crisis. And so to my friend, I don't think a lot of these amendments are asking to do things that don't have bipartisan support. To speak specifically to Maisie's amendment, to Senator Hirono's amendment, forgive me, she is asking for something that Republican witnesses spoke to, that law enforcement witnesses before our committee have spoken to, that a lot of the challenges they're facing right now is the fact that there's so much ignorance about these substances amongst young people that are putting them in positions where they're dying. And so when you have an idea, like is the core of this amendment, that speaks to common sense, bipartisan, Republican witness, Democratic witnesses, that speaks to what law enforcement agents in my state have been saying, when law enforcement is called to a scene where a child is dying, that is a reactive measure. It's not a proactive measure. And so I'm hoping that people will look and read the text of this amendment. It's not onerous, it's common sense. And then the last thing I want to say about the border, we know that most fentanyl is coming through various means, either Americans smuggling it over, or as Senator Hirono said, over the internet. But I will tell you, every senator on this side does want to secure the border. And I'd like to remind my colleague that we entered into good faith negotiations and came up with a bill that Senator Langford led that would have done a lot to secure the border, but it was frustrated because of the current president's desire not to do a bipartisan strong border bill. And so again, the motives of all of us is to get this done. What we are doing, the HALT Act is simply affirming what has already been the case for many years, which is the scheduling. We are simply asking in this amendment of Senator Hirono to please do some bipartisan, widely supported, common sense, evidence-based things that would show that our reaction to, yes, the greatest killer of people 18 to 45, that would be more than just doing what we already have been doing for the last 5+ years. I support this amendment.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornett?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No. No.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No.
Mr. Tillis?
No.
Mr. Kennedy? Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Smith?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Britt?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Moody? No. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Aye. Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Chairman Grassley?
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
12 to 2, the amendment lost. Were we ready to vote on the bill?
I have an amendment.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Amendment SIL 25171. This amendment, Mr. Chairman, is the Bipartisan Opioids Act that I've introduced with Senator Scott of Florida. This would provide grants to states and localities. It would improve data and surveillance of opioid-related overdoses. It would also provide grants to law enforcement for additional training related to overdoses and fentanyl tracing, along with containment devices to prevent secondary exposure, which, as you know, is a significant issue. Finally, it requires the DEA to submit to Congress as part of its annual report the level of funding needed to effectively carry out the fentanyl signature profiling program. Senator Scott and I have worked together on this and would like to see this be part of this legislation. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
the amendment that our friend from Vermont has proposed is certainly sounds like something we could take up separate and apart from this legislation. As you know, the law enforcement community has urged that the HALT Fentanyl Act pass with no amendments in order to keep the text as close as possible to the bill passed by the House so we can get this to the President's desk without delay. But that doesn't preclude the senator from Vermont or any other member of the panel from offering good suggestions that we could take up at a later time.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a moment to speak up in support of the amendment before us. As Senator Welch has mentioned, it does enjoy bipartisan support, so it should not be time-consuming or problematic for this committee to accept and have it move along with the bill. It will not cause a delay, as has just been suggested. But I also feel compelled to point out a related dynamic here. We're talking about additional tools to better inform policy and strategy at the DEA, obviously within the FBI. During the budget committee process in the recently adopted budget resolution that we all went through last week, I made an effort there unsuccessfully to suggest that we protect any and all resources that are targeting fentanyl and its illegal trafficking and use in the United States from being diverted to other activities. If we're genuine and sincere about cracking down on fentanyl, we must be protective of the resources, the budgets, and the personnel that are so focused, and add to the toolbox the ideas as proposed in this amendment. So when we suggest motions through the budget or elsewhere that we ought to be protective, again, of the resources and personnel that are going after the fentanyl crisis in America, then let's maintain the commitment, not just in this bill here today, but in all areas of our efforts here in the Senate. So long way of saying I support this amendment. It should not be problematic, has bipartisan support, and hope it passes in a moment.
Call the roll.
Mr. President,
Senator
Mr.
Booker.
Chairman, sir,
Senator Booker.
I wish you were president. Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, I'm calling on.
thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Just to Senator Cornyn's point, if I may again, this is already going to have to go back because of the manager's package. It is already going to have to go back to the House for them to re-vote on it. And so adding bipartisan supported bills with bipartisan support in the House and bipartisan support here, like test strips, to me, it seems like a logical thing to do on this vehicle. Should we not include that in this bill? I just want folks to know what it means not to include that in this bill. Say it takes us 6 months, and that would be glorious, frankly, if we got another fentanyl bill to fight the scourge done in 6 months. But say it took us 6 months. It is undoubtedly that we would see deaths happen in our country because children did not have access to fentanyl strips. So by us, to use my colleague's word, dithering, and not putting bipartisan supported bills like this, we are putting a situation in which lives could be saved, and we failed to do that. I strongly, strongly ask my colleagues in one of the greatest threats in our time to please do more than just a bill that is simply doing what is already done in the temporary scheduling of fentanyl.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham.
Graham, no, by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Britt.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Moody. Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Mr. Schiff.
Aye.
Chairman Grassley.
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
Okay, the amendment lost. Are we ready to?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly speak to two other amendments that are about to be brought up. I have worked across the aisle with my friend and colleague, Senator Cornyn, on a federal test strip bill. And I have supported Senator Booker on a reporting and transparency provision. I think requiring reporting makes great sense. I think all of us have worked in favor of transparency over a number of Congresses. And I really hope that we will find a way to make sure that there is robust and reliable reporting from the FBI to this committee, to this Congress, in order to understand what are the appropriate targets for private research, what are the consequences of this bill, and how to make sure that we're pursuing a path that keeps scheduled those analogs that are harmful and open for potential research or remediation or use those that are not. Thank you.
Yeah, let's report the bill. Clerk will call the roll. Oh, I guess we don't have enough people here to vote the bill out. Go ahead.
I've got it.
Or are we done and we'll recess until 1 o'clock?
I'm happy to bring up my amendments at 1 o'clock if people have places to go.
Go ahead with your amendment now.
So the first one I'd like to bring up, Mr. Chairman, is OLL 25212. this amendment would add a requirement that DEA provide Congress an annual report of the number of FRS DOJ has identified, what review has been conducted and for which the FRS was determined not to be Schedule 1, and the number of criminal prosecutions in which an offense involving the specific FRS. Currently, the DEA and DOJ are not forthcoming about the FRS they've identified or whether they're testing the substances at all. The data that is public and that is provided our office has been inconsistent for years. It seems if this is one of the biggest issues that is concerning us, that we would at least ask for transparency.
Let me interrupt you. We don't have a quorum, so we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, sir. To understand when we pass a law what the administration is doing. It seems very clear to me that we are passing this, we're looking to pass the HALT Act, but we have no mechanism to understand that with these fentanyl analogs, what is the DOJ, the DEA doing? They've been not forthcoming through multiple administrations, at least 2 administrations, with the FRS they've identified. And so it seems if we want to fight this scourge, that we have an obligation, as spelled out by the Constitution, to provide oversight to the departments that are doing it. It's just a common sense thing. I want to thank you publicly. In a good faith, your team and my team, we're asking about this and trying to come to a negotiated settlement, as Chris Coons mentioned before he left. One of the things that was said is, well, maybe the GAO could provide the report. But the truth is that the GAO couldn't provide the report because they would have to go to the FBI to get the information. And when we called the GAO, pursuing your team's solution, sir, they said to us, why add more bureaucracy to have to go from the FBI to the GAO than to Congress? It seems far simpler and less burdensome just to Congress to get the information they're asking for. And so I fully support, as I have in the past, temporary scheduling of fentanyl. I fully support the permanent scheduling of fentanyl. But as we have a vehicle that's moving, if we're going to permanently schedule this, Congress should have a mechanism to get the information that they need in order to make sure that the DOJ, whether it's under a Democratic administration or Republican administration, is actually doing their job. And so I feel very strongly that this is the lightest touch we could ask for, which is something we ask for in so many bills, is just report on what you're doing. What we're asking is just not onerous. It is done routinely throughout Congress and empowers us to do our job. Because absent this, we'll have no knowledge of what they are doing when it comes to the FRS that they're recovering. And so unless somebody else wants to speak on this, I fully would like to ask for a vote.
Okay, clerk will call the roll. No, but Graham, no by proxy.
Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley? Mr. Hawley?
No.
Mr. Holly, no by proxy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy? No. Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Smith?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Britt?
No by proxy.
Mrs.
No? Aye, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal. Sorry, Mr. Blumenthal? Thank you. Ms. Hirono.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker.
Most certainly aye.
Mr. Padilla. Mr. Welch. Mr. Schiff. Chairman Grassley.
No?
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
Okay. 12 to 10, the amendment is defeated. So now we, so come back at 1 o'clock.
Are there any amendments?
Are there any more amendments?
I have a number of amendments, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah. Senator Kennedy?
I have a question. Is that okay?
Yes.
Some of us have other committees, and I know we want to consider the amendments, and I know there's a meeting at the White House. Can you tell us, in your best estimate, when we're going to vote on the bill?
I would like to reconvene at 1 o'clock to go through the amendments and vote on the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Okay, we don't have a quorum, so,
Still keep going.
what?
I think we should still keep going until we get through and people have to leave. So let's keep voting through amendments now.
Okay. And you want to go ahead with your next amendment, Mr. Booker?
So I'm just trying to understand. We don't have the votes for the final passage of the bill right now.
That's right.
And your intention is still to vote on the amendments to the bill.
Yeah.
I would prefer to have my amendments come up when there's a quorum and my colleagues are here.
There's a quorum. Maybe there is a quorum.
There's a quorum, so go
Okay,
ahead.
then I will continue, Mr. Chairman. The next bill I have is regarding something similar to what was brought up before, which was the idea of test strips. This is actually to do something that, again, is very common sense, but to provide resources for states voluntarily, if they want to get resources to provide the life-saving test strips. To, again, underline the urgency to my colleagues, there are many people, as we all know, in the campaign that has been done in the previous administration, the One Bill Can Kill campaign. There are many young people who end up taking something they think is another substance. It could be something as like Adderall or what have you, and they end up getting a fentanyl that kills them. Test strips have proven in red states and blue states to be something that can be life-saving. That if you have a test strip to put on, to use for these substances, it could alert people to the fact that that fentanyl is present. And so this idea of making test strips more available to more people will literally save lives.
We don't have a vote.
It's proven to be life-saving time and time again. And that's why fentanyl test strips are supported by law enforcement. That's why fentanyl test strips are supported by prosecutors. That's why fentanyl test strips are supported by doctors and medical associations. That's why fentanyl test strips are supported by families of victims whose children died not knowing what substance they had. And so something as common sense as this, something that has bipartisan support, something that we know will save American lives, should have a sense of urgency to it. Because as you said, Mr. Chairman, moments ago, that in the time that we're having this discussion, people are dying. But they're not dying because fentanyl is not scheduled. Because fentanyl is scheduled right now. They're dying because they don't have the tools, the education, the resources to prevent this from happening in the first place. That's the rub. When it's pointed out that people are dying right now while we are having this conversation, it is false to say that's because we haven't passed this bill, because fentanyl is scheduled. And if our only response to the people dying during the time that we have this conversation is to do something that is already done, then that to me is the very definition of Congress doing nothing. This is a moving vehicle. Put on bipartisan ideas like my amendment right now in order to give a more wholesome response to a crisis. Test strips are widely supported. They're used in blue states and red states. There are state legislators from both parties who have put them forward. And therefore, I put it forward right now. Unless somebody else would like to speak on my amendment, I would like to call for a vote.
Senators,
Mr.
can
Chairman.
we vote? You want to speak?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schiff, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll be very brief. I just think that Senator Booker has expressed it so perfectly. That is, this bill codifies existing policy. It doesn't make a change to the schedule that hasn't already been put into effect. But this amendment does something new, additional, life-saving, non-controversial, bipartisan. And as we discussed during the last hearing on this bill has to go back to the House anyway. And there is bipartisan support in the House for the bill. Providing this amendment, I think, would only increase that, not detract from it. And I think Senator Booker has put his finger on exactly a big part of the problem. And that is, yes, some people take fentanyl because they know it's fentanyl and they want to take fentanyl. But a great many people who die of fentanyl poisoning are dying because they have taken something they did not know contained fentanyl. They are students who took something they bought online because they thought it would help them stay awake during exams, or they bought something online that they thought would help them concentrate and focus. They had no idea they were buying something that was going to kill them. And having these test strips, where the test strips are for a student in their dorm or at some student gathering, much as we would like to say, don't take anything at a student gathering, people do, but having these test strips available to young people will undoubtedly save lives. I mean, this is not theoretical here. And so I urge support for Senator Booker's amendment and yield back.
Clerk, call roll.
This is on Booker Amendment BAI 25062, correct?
No, it's BAI 25062.
Okay. Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Nope.
Mr. Lee?
Nope.
Mr. Cruz?
No.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
Nope.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt? No. Mrs. Britt? No. Mrs. Moody? No. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye. By proxy.
Mr. Coos?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Rono?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker?
Surprise, surprise, aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Welch?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schiff? Aye. Chairman Grassley?
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are
12
12.
to 2. I'd like to call the bill up for a vote now. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, I have more amendments, sir.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up OLL 25210. This amendment invests in public health and prevention measures by authorizing funds for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration for harm reduction programs to address what is our greatest national public health crisis. In New Jersey, we passed legislation last year that expanded access to life-saving harm reduction supplies, allowing harm reduction centers to distribute naloxone and other opioid antidotes. We need to invest in these type of common sense measures if we truly want to get a handle on addiction and overdose crisis. Every major medical association that has spoken to this issue has said this is a public health crisis. To have solely a law enforcement response, especially a response that we have had, a tool that we've had in the law enforcement toolbox for years now, as Congress has done the right thing and temporarily scheduled fentanyl analogs, to not have a public health response, to me, seems us walking blindly along the same strategies and seeing a crisis that we're not doing more as the world's most deliberative body to meet. This is indeed a public health crisis. This is indeed a mental health crisis. And there are so many young people in our country who cannot access the kind of preventative measures that would help them prevent their engagement with these dangerous substances in the first place. This is not just the chorus of consensus from our public health professionals in America, in red states and blue states, but is actually a chorus of consensus of the witnesses we just had before us, who have said we need a more wholesome response to one of the greatest public health crises in our country. And so this is common sense, this is bipartisan, this is evidence-based, this is something that we could easily do as a Congress right now to not put a common sense public health and mental health action on this that would not cost a great amount of resources. To not do that is to face a crisis and say the only thing we're going to do is what we've been doing. I ask my colleagues, I beseech them to do more about the fentanyl crisis on this bill as it moves through Congress. To not do something and to say that we'll do it later. Is it 1 month later? Is it 6 months later? Is it a year later? Is it a whole Congress later? If that happens, people will die as a result of our inaction. So I ask for a vote on OLL 25210, unless there's other people who would like to speak to this amendment.
Clerk will call roll.
Mr. Graham?
By proxy? No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Cruz?
No.
Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Mrs. Britt? No. Mrs. Moody? No. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar? Aye. Mr. Coons?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Rono?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Chairman Grassley?
No.
Well.
Well,
The ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
yeah, the amendment lost. Can we vote on the bill now?
I have more amendments, sir.
Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the recognition. I would like to call up Amendment OLL 25213. This is an amendment that would ensure that the FRS scheduled have a high potential for abuse and no medical value by requiring a basic review to determine a substance's pharmacological effect. As drafted, the HALT Act would outlaw substances that have a similar chemical structure as fentanyl, but not a similar effect. For example, substances that act as blockers, that is, things like antigens, like naloxone, would be scheduled simply based on their chemical structure. The only other time Congress enacted class-wide scheduling was in 2012. in the Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act. The language of this amendment is taken directly from that law that we passed in a bipartisan way. It is not burdensome. It is not additive. It is common sense. It draws from a bipartisan supported bill that is similar and related. Again, these are things that we can do that have shown in the past to have bipartisan support, that are not particularly objectionable, that would add to our ability as a nation to meet this crisis. For this Congress to have its only major response in the last 10 years that I've been here to this fentanyl crisis to just do a bill which is affirming what we have already done is not an adequate response. There are non-controversial things we can do. There are bipartisan supported things we can do. There are evidence-based things we can do. There are things that the law enforcement community is calling for that we can do. There are things that the medical community is calling for that we can do. This is one of those common sense, bipartisan, evidence-based approaches. I beseech my colleagues to do more in this bill to meet the gravity of this crisis. Bill Amendment OLL 25213 is one of those measures, and unless somebody else would like to speak to this, I call for a vote on my amendment.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Grant.
Grant.
No.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt. Mrs. Britt. No. Mrs. Moody. No. Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
I have a proxy.
Ms. Hirono.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Schiff. Aye. Chairman Grassley.
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
Yeah. We're,
Chairman, can I be recorded as present? Aye.
you can be, yes. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring up another amendment.
We're going to move the bill. We're going to vote it out right now.
Mr. Chairman, I think I have a right to offer amendments to a bill.
The clerk will call the roll on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confident the rules of this committee would allow me to offer common sense, good faith amendments that would make this bill better.
Mr. Grant.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Hawley.
Aye.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt. Mrs. Britt. Aye. Mrs. Moody. Aye. Mr. Durbin.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
What's that?
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
No by proxy.
Mis- Mr. Chairman, I would like to bring up Rule 4 of this committee, which says you cannot close off debate without a vote on that first. I'm willing to be outvoted, but it requires at least one vote of the minority. What we're doing is unprecedented. I would remind folks that we are operating with one of the most important bills, dealing with one of the most important issues. To cut off debate, to cut off the ability for members to bring up their amendments, good faith amendments that have bipartisan support, to me seems uncalled for. But in accordance to Rule 4, if you're going to do that, you should do it by the rules of the committee and call for a vote to cut me off, offering good faith, common sense, evidence-based, bipartisan ideas to make a bill better to save lives that are currently dying because of the opioid crisis. To cut off the ability to improve this bill with bipartisan ideas, to me, is unacceptable.
Continue to call the roll.
Mr. Padilla.
No.
Mr.
Welch, no by proxy.
Chairman Grassley.
Welch, no by proxy.
Chairman, yes.
On this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
The bill is reported, the meeting's adjourned.